Good evening, and I was going to start out by saying please take your seats, but everybody's sitting down already. So I'd just like to welcome Chief Wilderman and Curtis and Angus Dickey up to start us off this evening.
Can you hear me, or do I need the mic?
Oh, you're
Good. Okay, this song comes from the North Slavey people. It's a song some people call the tablecloth song. And the significance of that is that we pray for abundance. And we pray that we know how to share that, the abundance of the land as our ancestors did. When the newcomers came to this country, the indigenous people who lived here had a way and method of surviving on this land and using the resources. 200 years later, we still live on the land. And there's challenges that our ancestors probably would never have expected. And a lot of us never would have either. But the challenge here is, I just want to explain the song, and there's the reason why we're here. Our leadership will explain why they're here. But I just want to tell you what the song is about. It's a double beat song. It comes from my good friends up by Wrigley, up in that area, along the Mackenzie River. It's a song that we want to dedicate to all of you who came. And when you hear this song, think of what it implies. We want to have a table that's full of abundance for everybody. So take it as one.
welcome the community of Fort Nelson for coming today. Today is a really important event for us, and we'd really like to share our message with you guys. So I really appreciate you guys coming out to have a respectful dialogue about this topic and long-term water licenses in the Fort Nelson First Nation territory. So, merci.
Thank you to the drummers and to Chief Wilderman. So we are all here to learn a lot this evening and hopefully talk a lot. Thanks everybody for braving the weather and the ice and the rain. And I just want to do a couple of housekeeping items before. I know a lot of people in the room, but my name is Sonia and I was asked to facilitate tonight. And so I'm your neutral moderator, facilitator / MC. And if you start talking longer than our allotted time, I might come and wave my finger at you. But our bathrooms, just so everybody knows, and most people know, are over there, and the exits are at the back. And there's a new sign talking about when the blue light is flashing, only use the east and south exits to evacuate the building. So please remember that, should we need to evacuate. First off, also, we would just like to talk about some ground rules. Can everybody hear me at the back? Everybody's good? Yeah, okay. We have excellent sound techs here and a lot of work done by the Fort Nelson First Nation Lands Department to make this evening a really nice, successful evening. So maybe just a really quick round of applause to thank them for that. So for our ground rules, the first point that is most pertinent is to make sure that we have a respectful dialogue and that we all use appropriate language in this space. We would ask that you direct your comments and questions and concerns to the 2 microphones in the middle. We do have 2 panelists who are joining us through Skype, and the only way that they can hear your questions is through the microphones. So please make sure you ask in the microphone, and I may also repeat what you say just for clarification for them. We would also ask you that if you have questions, concerns, or comments that you'd like to bring out in the second half, that you keep it as close to 2 minutes as possible, and I'll be moderating that. And we will have the other 2 panelists join us. Would you like everybody sitting up here? Yeah. So as I introduce you, you can come up. And we definitely, or Fort Nelson First Nation is definitely of the mind that they want all the sides of the issue to be addressed and to be spoken to, and questions and comments to be free. So please feel welcome to share. This dialogue is similar to the Keepers of the Water for those of you who joined us in September. It's a continuation of that dialogue, and there's a few key messages that were asked to be brought forward. So I'm just going to read those out before I introduce the presenters. So there is a lack of information and data to make appropriate decisions on water allocation and use in Northeast British Columbia. That was one of the key messages from the Keepers of the Water Conference. Since the Keepers of the Water Conference, Fort Nelson First Nation has raised alarm regarding the issuance of long-term water licenses for shale gas extraction. And they have called for a moratorium on the long-term water licenses. Chief Wilderman will speak more about the Fort Nelson First Nation position and recent public awareness campaign. And a main goal for this evening for all of us gathered here today is to talk about this issue and clarify the position of Fort Nelson First Nation on shale gas and water, as well as to give the local communities an opportunity to weigh in again and to provide an update and ask any questions that you would like to ask. We have a great panel of presenters who are all very knowledgeable about shale gas from a variety of different backgrounds. This initial discussion will take about 45 minutes with some presentations and video, and that 45 minutes will be followed by a question and answer period with questions and comments and concerns from the floor of 2 minutes each at those two microphones very clearly in the center of the room. So I would like to introduce our panelists. We heard from Chief Charlene Wilderman of Fort Nelson First Nation. On Skype, we have Dr. Ty Age Alfred, who is the founding director of the School of Indigenous Governance at the University of Victoria. At the end of the table, we have Curtis Dickey, who is a counselor for Fort Nelson First Nation. And I'd like to call up Jackie Allen, who many of you know is a longtime resident, and she is a resident owner of the Sikanee River Campground. We have Dr. Gilles Wendling, who is a hydrogeologist with GW Solutions. And also on Skype, we have Ben Parfit, who is a resource analyst with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. So without further ado, I would like to, it's my great honor to introduce Chief Charlene Wilderman. She is the Chief Counselor for the Fort Nelson First Nation. Chief Wilderman was elected as Fort Nelson First Nation Chief Counselor in August 2012. Charlene has served her community as an elected council member since 2009. Prior to becoming Fort Nelson First Nation Chief Counselor, Charlene has worked for Spectra Energy since 2000. She is active on the land and in her culture. She enjoys hunting, fishing, and continuing to expand her knowledge of Dene culture. Her grandparents, Fred Burke and Madeline Needley, were respected elders within the nation. Her mandate from the community is to ensure cultural survival for the coming generations, and she may be joined during the question period by Lana Lowe and other community members and council. So, Charlene.
Thank you. So I'd like to welcome you to the Fort Nelson First Nation Traditional Territory, and I look forward, as I said earlier, of having a respectful dialogue with the community of Fort Nelson to discuss our concerns about the long-term water licenses in our territory. So as the Chief of the Fort Nelson First Nation, I was privileged to lead a delegation of councillors, community members, to present our concerns about the risk about water resources as a result of the increased shale gas activity in our territory. We took these actions because our repeated attempts to reach out to the provincial government and industry have gone ignored, forcing us to make our position public. Out of the respect to our local community, we first raised these concerns publicly with our Keepers of the Water Forum that was held in September 2012. When we invited citizens, industry, provincial representatives, mayor, and council to our comprehensive 4-day Keepers of the Water conference. Our message was loud and clear then, as it is now, today. There is not enough hydraulical data or scientific basis to move forward with these enormous long-term water licenses at this time. The energy resources from our territory in northeast BC are the most significant economic driver for BC's economy. But our community is out of sight and is out of mind to most British Columbians. We feel that we are being treated as such by the provincial government and that we are being ignored. Our community felt it was important to take this journey and to share our story with the citizens of BC. We don't only believe that this is a First Nation issue, this is a BC resident and global issue, worldwide. The plants, animals, and fish, as well as our own people, depend on the water resources in our territory for our survival and our ability to exercise our treaty rights. Since 2008, we have worked very hard with natural gas industry and government to provide economic opportunities to our members and to the entire province through responsible resource development. We have tried to negotiate agreements to ensure long-term protection of water resources, but our growing concerns about irresponsible, unsustainable water use in the Horn River Basin have gone ignored for too long. We are extremely concerned about the massive giveaway of water from our territory without any credible process to determine what the long-term impacts will be on our land, the animals, and our people and families in this community and in BC. The members of the nation will not stand by while there is no proper process to address these long-term protections of the water resources in the Horn River and Liard Basin and throughout our territory. There are nearly 20 long-term water license applications before Premier Christy Clark's government, and these licenses will allow shale gas companies to withdraw tens of billions of liters of water annually from our territory. Under the Water Act, these licenses are valid up to 40 years. Under these licenses, this water will be taken from our lakes, rivers, and streams and mixed with toxic chemicals for shale gas extraction. After extraction, the water is disposed of in deep oil field injection wells, and one such license alone will result into construction of a 20-meter concrete block in Fort Nelson River to divert and contaminate up to 3 billion liters of fresh water for shale gas operations in the Horn River Basin. The Fort Nelson River is the lifeblood of our community and our territory, and we cannot stand by while our lifeblood is being drained with government approval without addressing our serious concerns about water. We've tried to work cooperatively with industry and the BC government to manage oil and gas activities in our territory, and we accept that some oil and gas can occur. However, we demand that shale gas activities only happen under these conditions. Before water licenses are issued, proper regional baseline studies must be completed. At minimum, gas companies and the BC government submit 5-year development plans, which will identify all proposed water withdrawals, gas well sites, and other proposed infrastructure prior to any application for developmental permits. Cumulative effects and environmental assessment processes be in place to ensure water withdrawals are capped at ecological sound levels, and culturally significant land and water resources must be protected and off limits to industry activities. We also believe that industry should require water withdrawals and gas extraction activities to be subject to rigorous monitoring enforced by an independent body. Failure to embrace these basic conditions will lead to increasing yet avoidable conflict. It is time for the province and industry to address our long-standing concerns. Our rivers are the heart of our people's culture and community. Water gives us life. It provides us with health, substance, comfort, mobility, and a spiritual and cultural connection to the land. Fort Nelson First Nation is therefore resolved to continue fighting all water licenses in our territory until the province comes to the table with local and First Nation communities to plan on how we will address this new and unprecedented rush for the water on our land. Must-see.
Must-see, Chief Wilderman. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Ty Age Alfred, who I think might be on our screen over to the left. To the right, your right, to my left. Dr. Ty Age Alfred is the founding director of the School of Indigenous Governance at the University of Victoria. Ty Age is Ganawage in the Mohawk Nation. He was educated at Concordia and Cornell and is a professor at the University of Victoria and as said the founding director of the School of Indigenous Governance. Ty Age is the recipient of a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Studies and a National Aboriginal Achievement Award in the field of education. Ty Age is widely acknowledged as among the most renowned scholars in Indigenous studies on the continent. He also works as a writer and advisor to First Nations governments and community organizations, and served as an infantryman in the U.S. Marine Corps. He is the author of 3 books, Heeding the Voices of Our Ancestors, Peace, Power, Righteousness, and Wasasi, Indigenous Pathways of Action and Freedom. So please, we're pleased to have you here, Dr. Ty Age Alfred.
All right, well, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me and letting me be part of this dialogue tonight. And thanks to the elders for the song and welcoming us in a good way. I'm going to say a few remarks here just to, I guess, add some context to the discussion in terms of the background politically and legally that we find ourselves in Native government relations in Canada up to the current time. And so, not to take up too much time, but to give people a sense of where we've been, where we are, and where we might be going in terms of the legal rights of the First Nations in relation to their land and in relation to the Canadian Constitution. So the start of the story has to be put in the context of a relationship in the colonial era. Up until the 1970s, basically the approach of the Canadian government was to either ignore or to marginalize Indigenous people, and with the assumption that Indigenous people were on their way to extermination in terms of their culture fading away physically, and also with respect to their presence on the land. And this is a general policy and a general approach that was taken across Canada. It's no different in your area. Of course, this did not come to pass, and what we've seen since the 1970s is what you might call a resurgence of the Native people culturally, politically, spiritually, and that's reflected in the laws and the policies and the politics in Canada today. The context that we're all working in trying to think through the issues that you're dealing with, and no matter where you are in Canada, there's a similar discussion going on, whether it's in regard to shale gas or the tar sands or lumber or mining or whatever it may be. The simple fact is that Native people are still in their territories, and Canadian Constitution recognizes that Native people have rights to their land that must be justifiably infringed, if at all. And this principle comes from the 1982 Constitution. There's a section in the Canadian Constitution, number 35, section 35(1), which recognizes all existing Aboriginal and treaty rights. It recognizes and affirms them. And so since 1982, basically in Canada, what people have been trying to do is figure out what that phrase means. And of course, you've had arguments in court, arguments in the public, and arguments in government negotiating rooms and in the media even over what that phrase means. And you have the First Nations, of course, arguing for a very strong sense of treaty rights and full possession and control of that territory. And you have the government, on the other hand, in support of industrial development or residential development on First Nations territories, arguing a different perspective. Since the 1980s, the issue has been clarified in law somewhat by Supreme Court decisions. Major Supreme Court decisions have come forward in Canada which have basically laid down a concept of Aboriginal title, which is best described as there's underlying Crown title and there's such a thing as Aboriginal title, which is a burden on that. And the law in Canada says that the Crown can exercise its authority on its title, but Aboriginal title is something that exists and cannot be ignored, cannot be infringed without proper consultation and without compensation and for legitimate purposes. All of this is spelled out in the law. There's lawyers in the room that can probably do a better job than I can in giving you the absolute detail. But my purpose of putting that forward is to show the distinction between the old era of ignoring Native people, of ignoring their rights, and their presence, and the current era, which is a constitutionally defined set of rights for Native people to be participant, at least, in the activities that go on in their territory. And from the Native perspective, it's still being argued. They have the right to have a say as to what kind of development happens, and also a veto on that development. Canadian law hasn't gone so far as to recognize that, but the politics around Native communities today in Canada are very much around that question and the different assertions around that. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, you had a period where, in conjunction with the law developing, you had a really serious set of conflicts. Much of it centered in BC around resource extraction industry, logging, and so forth. Native people stood in the way of development in order to get recognition from government and from the public for their rights. This was resolved somewhat in British Columbia with the establishment of the BC Treaty, British Columbia Treaty process, which for the most part asked Native people to set aside the conflicts that they had in favor of a negotiated resolution. So stop blockading, stop standing on your land, preventing development, the negotiation table, and let's work out an arrangement that works for both of us of law. And for the most part, that's defined what Native politics is to BC. for the last few years and actually a couple of generations now. What you have is basically a situation where there's been a development since the 80s and 90s with all this negotiation, with a large-scale process that went on in Canada from 1992 to 96 in the midst of everything I'm talking about, called the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, where all the political interests, the provinces, the federal government, Indian Affairs Bureau, representatives of industry, various First Nations all across Canada came together and tried to come to a sense, a shared sense of what we need to do as a whole country in order to resolve these lingering conflicts. It was generally acknowledged that the effort to get rid of natives failed. Natives had survived, but also natives had to accept the fact that Canada was here. It wasn't 200 years ago where there was just native sovereignty. So it was reconciling Canadian sovereignty and native sovereignty. And basically the recommendations of this Royal Commission, which was finished in 1996, are what's guiding the consensus in native politics today, which is that native people still have rights in the land that need to be respected. There's a great need for capacity development in native people to overcome the harms that were done in that colonial era. Resource revenues need to be directed towards First Nations, and there needs to be a decolonization, as we say, of the way government relates to native people. Government still relates to native people through the Indian Act, which is a really controlling law, and there's a whole set of laws around that control native people to a very, very minute degree and prevent them from actually acting on their own autonomy and their own power. And so that was another recommendation, and that's in the process of happening now. So when it comes to legal rights, there's this thing called Aboriginal title, which I think everybody is, well, I don't want to assume everybody's aware, but anybody who's in this business, in terms of doing relationships, whether it's economically or political, understands that native people have a powerful position in relation to their Aboriginal title on the land and the rights that it gives them in order to have a dialogue and to have a participation in a process of deciding how the land is used. When it comes to policy in BC, we're dealing with a new relationship, as it's called, where the negotiation process I mentioned just a few minutes ago is generally seen to have been a failure, in the sense that it wasn't possible to negotiate a resolution to this because the Canadian federal government and the provincial government for years stuck to a position that in order to resolve these issues, in order to have a relationship built, native people surrender their original inherent rights, they need to surrender their title, and then be granted back in provincial law a set of rights that conform to provincial government authorities and make it easy for the provincial government to relate to First Nations as sort of municipalities in the relationship between governments in Canada. Native people have refused to do this for the most part, especially those with pre-existing treaties, as the people are in the area that we're talking about here. And so in British Columbia, they came up with this response, which was, let's put aside the big questions. Let's put aside really the most important questions of who owns the land, what does sovereignty mean for First Nations and for Canada. Let's talk about how we can, in the meantime, do business together and make sure that those other objectives are met, the ones I talked about, capacity development, resource revenue sharing, and sort of modernizing the relationship. So that's what you call the new relationship, and there's been a willingness on the part of government, starting with Gordon Campbell, to increase the share of First Nations in development projects if they're willing to go along with the agenda that's been put forward for development in areas such as yours and in other areas. So we're kind of in that relationship now. Many First Nations in British Columbia have chosen to engage in this. Many others have chosen not to. And it's really up to each First Nation to make that decision as to whether or not they're willing to stand on and stand on the struggle for recognition of a very strong position that they have a right of control over their territory, or whether or not they want to get involved in developing the capacity of their community in a more kind of practical-minded sense in getting benefit from industrial development as it goes on. That's the new relationship. The politics in Canada today are very interesting because they're changing kind of in the last few weeks. You know, you've had basically the development of a new movement, and I'm sure those of you who pay attention to the news and will understand and will have heard this Idle No More movement. It may seem far away, or it may not seem related to what we're talking about here, but it actually is part of what we're talking about here, because you have a challenge on the part of First Nations leaders who have not been a part of that group of First Nations that want to do business and want to work with industry and work with government under the current framework, and urban-based people or younger people who haven't seen themselves get any benefit or don't see any potential benefit in these, organizing around an idea of stronger recognition of the constitutional rights that they see First Nation people having in the Canadian Constitution, pre-existing treaty rights, which grant them sovereignty over their territory, to which any kind of involvement of industry or activities of industry must be negotiated on a nation-to-nation basis. Very strong statements in this new movement and consensus that's developing around environmental protection. And also very strong commitments emerging among younger people and certain groups of First Nations, especially in Ontario, Manitoba, for commitment again to go back to the 80s, so to speak, for direct action on the land in defense of their rights, and to force the government's hand to a stronger recognition of their rights. And so this is something that's not unrelated to what's going on in your area as well. All of these things that I described are kind of national issues, and the government will respond to, I think, what's going on in other parts of the country. Even if Idle No More, so to speak, is not so active in your area, government policy is in the process of being reshaped, put it that way. And the representation that First Nations have at the national level, the Assembly of First Nations, as it's called, is basically coming apart at the seams along this fracture that I mentioned, between those First Nations that do want to cooperate within the current framework and those that want to take a much stronger stand. And so we're right in the middle of a kind of a shifting landscape as far as First Nations politics in Canada go. And a lot of it is pointing to a future of a much stronger stand on the part of most First Nations, and certainly the younger generation of leaders and the younger generation of people who are organizing the representation of First Nations people in Canada today. So I'm going to stop there. That's my basic introduction to the context of what we're talking about, and I look forward to answering any questions from anyone as best I can with the knowledge that I have.
Masi Cho, Dr. Alfred, we're going to hold our applause till the very end and thank all of our speakers. So that was really a great introduction. It's now my privilege to introduce to you a really good friend of mine, Curtis Dickey, counselor from Fort Nelson First Nation. Curtis is an artist, a drummer, carver, and carpenter. He has a certificate in oil and gas field operations and has worked in many aspects of the oil and gas industry, including production, exploration, and construction. An active hunter, Curtis maintains a strong connection to the land and his Kwagilth and Dene traditions. In 2009 to 2010, Curtis worked with the Fort Nelson First Nation Lands Department and now works for Deer River Holdings. And I believe that Curtis is going to show us a video, so I'll hand it over to you, Curtis.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Clarify some of the confusion of our message. And as a lot of you may know, our family, the Dickey family, we have a very large family. We still rely on sustaining our family off of the land. And I myself do not buy any meat, chicken, or fish from the grocery store. And I haven't done so for quite some time. My grocery store is out there on the land. I've been involved in the seismic industry off and on since 2002. I know the industry has to move forward. My concern is, how will the water quality affect the wildlife that sustains my family? I don't want to take up too much time here, so I want to show you guys a couple of short clips of the area that I've been hunting. My grandpa trapped and hunted in the area long before I did. And it's a place, this actual clip is a place where I've crossed for the last 10 years Every year it's different. Every year, on more than one occasion when we first started heading out there, we've sunk our quads trying to get across this river. And this past fall, as you can see in the video, it was quite a shock to what I saw. And I took a video of it and I showed some of the elders in our community, and it was beyond belief. They couldn't believe that was the same river that we've been going to every year. So I'm not an expert, but I can't help but wonder how many liters of water were extracted upstream of this point where this video was shot. Two Island Lake is one of the lakes where Deer River begins, and I want to know how many liters of water, how many years can this watershed continue to be relied upon for fracking? Nobody seems to know that answer. We will not know the answer until proper regional baseline studies are completed. I know one thing for sure is, long after the gas is gone, I want my children to be able to hunt, fish, and gather food off the land the same way I do now. And you can play that presentation now. That's 4 years ago for you guys that can't read it back. Is it Deer River? Jesus. Makes you wonder all the drilling activities upstream. You know, they ask if it has an effect. There was a time when me and my dad couldn't even cross this on the quad. Like, not even, don't even think about walking across it. And now you can see it's just a trickle of what it was. That actually, I don't know. Pretty dismal future for fish and wildlife if this continues. That's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Curtis, for bringing your words and your footage to us. It was very, very good to see that. So now it's a great pleasure to introduce somebody that I'm sure a lot of folks know here in town, Jackie Allen, who is a resident owner of Sikanee River Campground. Jackie is a longtime Fort Nelson resident, having moved to Sikanee Chief 3 years ago. Prior to becoming a small business owner, Jackie served on the Fort Nelson Town Council for 9 years. She has recently written a letter that many folks will probably have read in the Fort Nelson News, stating her concerns about water use in the shale gas industry. Thanks, Jackie.
I guess we have to talk into these mics so the gentleman via Skype can hear what we have to say. So good evening, everyone. I feel privileged to be here and offered a chance to tell my story. My thanks to Chief Wildeman and the community for inviting me, and to those who organized the event, thank you. And to everyone for attending and for listening, I thank you. I'm listening too to what others have to say, and I look forward to the questions a bit later. I've been following the Fort Nelson First Nations efforts to increase public awareness around the issue of water licensing with interest. I've been reading a lot about the use of water for oil field injection purposes, otherwise known as fracking. Over the past few years, I've been trying to learn as much as possible on this topic because of the situation my husband Wayne Gillis and I find ourselves in 2 hours south of here at our home at Sikanee Chief. About eight and a half years ago, after spending 30 years in this community raising our family and getting to know many of the people that I see here tonight, Wayne and I purchased the Sickanee River Campground and RV Park. We became the proud owners of 17 beautiful acres of land on the bank of the beautiful Sickanee River. I believe we owe the success of our business not only to the fact that we are on the Alaska Highway, but also to the fact that our particular location is indeed a beautiful one. For 5 years, we spent our summers at Sickanee Chief and returned home to Fort Nelson for the winters. 3 years ago, we sold our home up here and put a modular home on the property at Sickanee Chief, and that's now our full-time residence and our business. Our first winter there was just what we had hoped for, peace and quiet and the chance to enjoy the property that we don't get the chance to do in the summertime when we're quite busy. Then Progress Energy entered our lives. Progress Energy was becoming active in the area, and they were looking for a significant source of water. They found what they wanted at the old bridge site right next door to our property, easy access to a river. To make a long story short, Progress Energy has been granted permits by the BC Oil and Gas Commission to withdraw water from the river at that site. The permit that's in place right now is a short-term use of water authorization, referred to as a Section 8, that was issued this past September 20th and is set to expire on May 15th of this year. It authorizes Progress to withdraw up to 350,000 cubic meters of water during that period of time. That's 350 million liters of water. That's a lot of water. In order to withdraw the water, a staffed 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week work site has been set up just above the high water mark on the river by the old bridge. It houses 4 or 5 diesel generators, assorted industrial-sized pumps, a diesel steam heat trailer, a portable light plant, lots of pipes and valves going every which way, a portable outhouse, and space to park 3 or 4 pickup trucks. 3 or 4 withdrawal hoses lead to the river, and a plastic pipeline leads the other direction, up over the hillside all the way to the brake check on the north side of the Sickanee Chief Hill. There it joins a permanent freshwater pipeline that goes off in a couple of different directions for who knows where and how far, because that's all top secret, you see. I do know that the water they're pumping out of the river right now on the north side is actually going uphill by temporary pipeline, and then back down the hill and under the river and up the other side by permanent pipeline to a well pad on the south side of the river. That's kind of amazing to even think about. But there's no power at Sickanee Chief unless you produce your own. So Progress is using the diesel generators on the riverbank to produce electricity for the pumps and assorted paraphernalia they need to get the water from the river to the well sites via that pipeline. These generators run 24 hours a day, and we can hear them anytime we're outside. Once the weather gets nicer and we're able to open our windows, we'll hear them inside as well. Every minute of every day. Another distraction is the light plant that lights up the riverbank. People who have traveled the highway during the hours of darkness over the past couple of winters will have noticed, I'm sure. For us, it's like having a stationary full moon shining in your bedroom window every night of the year, or every night of the winter. The service trucks that come and go all night long are a further noise and a light distraction to this quiet spot that we envisioned we would be moving to a few years back. Wayne and I have begrudgingly learned to live with the noise and the light and activity on the riverbank during the winter, our off-season. Maybe because we see it, hear it, live it, we have very serious concerns about the long-term effects of fracking. We don't believe anyone has a clear understanding of what those effects will be. Today's best science is only that, today's. Science is theory only and is subject to change when new evidence comes along. Theories are constantly being refigured, and new research can render old ideas outdated or incomplete. Think DDT pesticides, tobacco use, asbestos. But we understand that the great economic engine must be fed, or in this case, watered. The small economic engine of Sickanee Chief must be fed too, and that's why we put a lot of time and effort into presenting our case to the BC Oil and Gas Commission, as is our right, via written submissions, as is your right, via written submissions. Anything that you want to say to the Oil and Gas Commission, just put it in writing and it's on record. Our written submissions put forward the argument that our tourist business and the water withdrawal activity on the riverbank only a few meters away are very incompatible. We have asked that if industry must withdraw water from Sickanee Chief River, that they do so between mid-September and mid-May, and that we be allowed to offer our guests a peaceful, enjoyable stay in our campground for the remaining 4 months of the year. We believe that's fair. 8 months for them, 4 months for us. Not only would that be beneficial to us and our business, but it would be beneficial to people who are not our customers, but people who like to make use of that corner of the river, that piece of public land, to fish and picnic and launch their riverboats. It appears that the OGC has honored our request so far and have set May 15th as an expiry date on the current Section 8 water withdrawal permit. Progress Energy is quickly getting busier and busier because Petronas, a Malaysian-owned state enterprise, purchased the company just before Christmas, and there's now a significant influx of cash. They're one of the best positioned companies to build an LNG plant at Kitimat and ship natural gas to the Asian market. In order to realize that goal, they're drilling and fracking more wells right now and for a good many years yet to come. Connected to that increase in activity is their permanent plan to change their water withdrawal point on the Sickanee Chief River to just around the bend of the river, a little bit more out of sight, but just as noisy. That will require a long-term water license instead of the short-term permits that they're using to date. A long-term water license may very well enable them to withdraw water 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So much for the quiet fishing hole by the old Sickanee Chief Bridge. And that's why I support Fort Nelson First Nations' efforts to raise awareness and encourage dialogue about both the short and long-term implications of water licenses being issued to energy companies to withdraw water from BC's rivers, lakes, and streams. I cannot sit by and watch this happen without voicing my concerns. I hope you understand the reasons why. Like a good friend said to me tonight, we don't want to have to change the name of our business to Sickanee Creek RV Park.
Musty, Jackie, thank you very much for bringing forward your story. Our next speaker is Dr. Gilles Wendling, who many of you have seen at the Keepers of the Water. He is a hydrogeologist with GW Solutions and has over 25 years' experience in hydrogeology and water management. His focus is groundwater and surface water interaction. Through his firm, GW Solutions, Gilles has worked with hundreds of clients, including the Pembina Institute, the Regional District of Nanaimo, and City of Dawson Creek, as well as with Fort Nelson First Nation. Gilles is highly regarded in his field and is regularly consulted by Radio Canada and CBC to provide commentary about water and watershed-related matters.
Good evening, everybody, and it's my pleasure to be here. I have a few slides that I'm going to show and to talk about the issue of watershed interaction between groundwater and surface water, which is one water, and how, or what is the role played by the industry and what are the consequences of the existing and proposed oil and gas activities in the region. So what are some of the key issues? This map shows the Horn River Basin. So we are in the northeast corner of BC, and this is what has been called the Horn River Basin. This is the Laird and Fort Nelson River intersection. The Fort Nelson River goes around here Port Nelson is right here. This map shows the locations and the quantity of water being allotted to the oil and gas industry from various sources. In dark blue, we have water which comes from lakes. In yellow, we have water that comes from dugouts. In this color, we have water which comes from stream and rivers. And then we have in dark brown the water from the storage. So you can see the distribution and the size. And the larger the diameter, the more water is allocated. Now I have gone to the OGC website, and as of last week, these are the quantities that are being approved for extraction on a per day basis and on an annual basis. I use the unit of Olympic swimming pool. An Olympic swimming pool is 50 meters long by 25 meters wide by 2 meters thick. So it represents 2,500 cubic meters. So over a whole year, over 2,300 Olympic swimming pools of water are approved for extraction for use by oil and gas. What is important is to look at the distribution, and this is represented by this pie chart here. The majority of the water, 55%, actually comes from dugouts. 30% is approved to be extracted from stream and rivers, and the minority actually is from lakes and storage. So what's important to realize is that dugouts play a key role in the quantity of water which is approved from extraction. And what is a dugout? You remember when you were kids and you were by the ocean or by a lake, and you would dig a hole in the ground, in the sand or in the gravel, and there would be water accumulating at the bottom of that hole. You would take a little pail and remove the water, and the more you bail, the more water comes to the bottom of the hole. This is a dugout. This is a mini dugout. Dugout work with the same principle. A dugout is like a shallow dug well. This is an illustration of a shallow dug well. We have the well, and here my aquifer. The aquifer is at rest. The top of the aquifer is the water table. Actually, the water table will have a slight slope because groundwater in the ground always moves. Groundwater is always moved from a high energy source to a low energy source. So it's always in movement. So when you want to get water from a well, you dug your well, you put a pump in it, and you turn the switch on. When you do that, you create a drawdown in the well. The drawdown represents a difference in energy locally. You have locally water at low energy and water at high energy provided by the water table. This difference of energy creates a movement of water towards your well. So water is pulled towards your well because you create this drawdown. So the principle of a dugout is the same. When the industry is interested by having water from a dugout, they dug a hole in the ground, they accumulate water at the bottom of the hole, and then they start pumping from that hole. And the water will come from the side and from the bottom, and will keep coming, and will keep coming as long as they keep pumping. So a dugout is actually a connection to a shallow aquifer. And a shallow aquifer is, by definition, connected to a wetland, connected to a lake, connected to a river. An aquifer is part of a system because water is dynamic, water moves. Last summer, I completed a project where I needed water, and that was the land I was testing. There is a big aquifer under that land. I drilled a few wells, and I started pumping at about 300 gallons a minute. And I pumped continuously for 7 days. There is a creek right here. At day 2, I started noticing that the creek was starting to drop. After 7 days of pumping, when we stopped, the creek had dropped by half a meter. The aquifer and the creek, they are connected. This is a view of the site where this pumping took place. So I had one well right here, one here, one here. So I can assimilate this series of wells to a dugout. If I had a dugout right here and I was pumping from it, it would be the same. This is where the river was affected. This is where I have noticed drawdown, up to half a meter in that zone. Groundwater, surface water, they are connected. When you pump from a dugout, you may affect the river nearby. Last summer, I don't know if you remember, but it was a dry summer. It was considered a drought condition. And GC was aware of that and said, guys, we are dealing with a drought here. We have to be reasonable. So what did they do? On August, they issued this directive in saying oil and gas operators are required to suspend all short-term water withdrawal in northern BC. The rivers are under stress. Let's stop pumping. Except withdrawal of water stored in dugouts is not suspended. So guys, you can keep using your dugout. What did I show previously? 50%, over 55% of waters approved from extraction is from dugout. So guess what? We keep stressing the rivers because we keep pumping from dugouts. That doesn't make sense. Now, changing subject. The OGC has developed this tool called the Northeast Water Tool. They have spent time modeling the behavior of aquifers over numerous watersheds indicated in purple in order to quantify what is available as runoff, as water at surface. So this tool allows you, if you are interested to extract water from a certain location, to go on the map, to go to that location, to click, and automatically the tool will provide a picture, a map of the area above that point from which runoff is going to be collected. And it gives you a table. This table describes per month what is available globally in the watershed. And then they consider that 85% has to be kept for the fish, the bird, or the ecosystem that rely on the water system. 15% is available. And then they give you, this is the 15% which is available. And then say, guys, there are already several pads, several industries which are using the water. They already have their Section 8 application in place. So part of that water is already allocated. The remaining is still available. How much do you want? This is what this table gives you, and this is what the tool provides. So So the OGC says we know very well, we have done our homework, we have mapped, we have modeled, we know what's available, 15% is safe, let's use that. It's a good tool, they've done a lot of homework. So what is the key assumption? The key assumption that is you won't stress a river if you take 15% of the water that you see at any time during the year. So it means that if this is a river, with the shape of its invert, this is a river in February or in September or in March, the assumption is that 15% is for grab. So we take it, and this is what happens. So the comparison of the picture before and after you have taken 15% in that situation is not too bad. There's not a large area on the side that you lose due to this additional extraction of the water. So I'm okay with that. Now let's consider this situation. A very different shape. Let's say we are 200 meters, 300 meters upstream from the previous location. So there is a little plateau here. This is my river. Let's assume I have 15% available. I take my 15%. What's happening here? It's not underwater anymore. What about all the ecosystems that rely on a wet and immersed environment in this area? They will suffer. Is this good? I don't think it's a good situation. Very recently, last year, a report was issued. This report was issued months of work by a team made of people, fisheries biologist, Alan Chapman, who is kind of the leader for water for the OGC, people from various ministries, and they came up with recommendations. Risk associated with water extraction in rivers. They call it the Risk Assessment Framework for Winter Withdrawal in northern BC. Rule of thumb, the smaller the river, the smaller the creek, the more vulnerable it is to extraction. So based on the work they have done, for very sensitive streams, they have looked at various levels of extractions. So these are the withdrawal amounts. So as you can see, we have a medium risk if we extract less than 5%. We have high risk if we extract more than 5% for a low flow stream. For a stream which is just a little higher, more than 10 cubic meters per second for mean annual discharge, we have a low risk if we extract less than 5%. Medium risk between 5 and 10%. High risk greater than 10%. So what about the 15%? Maybe it's too high. We need to revisit that. We need to be more cautious about what we allow to extract from rivers. What we don't know. You can go online. In Victoria, they have a database that they manage, and it's called the BC Water Resource Atlas. And you can select various layers of information. So here you have selected aquifers. So this is Northeast BC. This is the Winston Reservoir. Fort St. John is right here, Hudson's Hope. Laird River, Fort Nelson River, Fort Nelson down here. This is the Fort Nelson First Nation territory. This illustration shows where we know where aquifers are, where we have mapped aquifers, where we know the approximate lateral extent of aquifers. Here, nothing. It's not because there are no aquifers, because we don't know where they are. We don't have any information about groundwater in this part of the country. We should have information. It's critical that we know where aquifers are, how thick they are, how wide they are, to which rivers they are connected. It's important. What we should know. This is a piece of land. We know the surface in green, we can see it. There is a creek flowing a little drop here. We have a drilling pad with a well. We have a few dugouts. They get water from a shallow aquifer system. Deeper, we have a thicker, larger aquifer, more like a regional type aquifer. Both these aquifers provide water to this creek here all year long, summer, winter. This groundwater is at a constant temperature. It cools the creek in the summer. It prevents freezing of the creek in the winter. This aquifer plays a key role. This one too. We have a camp nearby. They have their drinking water well. They need drinking water. They work there. So we need to know. I'll go back to that. It's very important that in every sub-watershed, in every watershed, we understand that. We know how thick this is. Is it 3 meters thick? Is it 5 meters thick? Is it 20 meters thick? Is it providing 100 cubic meter a second to that creek or 1 cubic meter per second? If I take 50 cubic meter per second, I am going to dry out this aquifer. I'm going to take what should end up in the creek. I need to know. Same thing here. This deep aquifer, I need to know where it is. When I'm going to drill, how am I going to affect that very thick aquifer, which provides a large quantity of water to the system? I also need to understand what's happening from 0 to 3 kilometers depth. We need to visualize where the various plays are. We know we have deep aquifer system. Here, so the scale is roughly 3 kilometers here, and we have 0, 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers. This is a horizontal scale, so there is a slight exaggeration. And we know at depth 1.5 kilometers, we have water, we have bedrock aquifers which are saturated with water. We also have dry zones, and we have a lot of mixed zones which contain both gas and water. But as a rule of thumb, groundwater is definitely present under our feet. And we need to understand what we talked about previously and its connection to the deeper system. This is almost a scale. This is about 200 meters. This is 3 kilometers. So now the well pad that we have here, you have a series of wells drilled down to about 3 kilometers and then extending laterally another 3 kilometers. And we're going to frack in that zone. What is going to happen for the groundwater in between here? Is it going up to the cracks? Is it going up through other drill holes? And we're going to dispose of return water, low quality water, through disposal wells, supposedly in a very confined and controlled system. But if it's not as controlled, and if we have cracks, and if my waste start going up where I don't expect to have it, is it going to reach these systems? Is it going to end up in my creek? We need to know. We need to monitor. We have the responsibility. We are the steward of the land. What do we know in the territory? This is the Horn River Basin, so where most of the work, most of the studies have been focused. And already in this region, we are realizing how ignorant we are. So imagine about the rest of the territory. We know very, very little. So we definitely need to do our homework. We need to understand how much water is present in the subsurface at 10 meters, 20 meters, 50 meters depth. How much water is transiting, is moving in the aquifers. How much water is discharging to the rivers. The water that we see in the rivers in September is groundwater. It hasn't rained for a long time. What you see comes from the bottom of the river, from the side of the river. It's groundwater feeding the river. So we need to be very careful. If we start extracting that groundwater 500 meters, 1 kilometer away from the river, we are modifying the whole dynamic of movement of water to the river. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Okay, so thank you very much, Gilles, for bringing your science to all of us here tonight in what I feel is a really clear way. For those of you who know me, I like to burn the stuff on the top of the surface and work with the four-legged animals, but it's very important what's below the surface too, definitely, as we're seeing. So last, but most definitely not least, is another good friend, Ben Parfitt. He is a resource analyst for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Ben joined the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in 2005 after years working as an investigative journalist with numerous magazines as a reporter with the Vancouver Sun. He is author and co-author of 2 books on forestry issues and currently devotes much of his policy research to natural resources, with special attention paid to energy, water, forest resources, and climate change. Ben Parfitt is the lead author of From Stream to Stream, Emerging Challenges for BC's Interlinked Water and Energy Resources, and Fracture Lines, Will Canada's Water be Protected in the Rush to Develop Shale Gas? Thank you very much for joining us, Ben. We'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You can? Great. So I want to thank Chief Wilderman in particular for the invitation to speak today, and also to Lana Lowe, the lands manager at the Port Nelson First Nation, who I've worked very closely with over the last few years. We've heard an awful lot this evening, and in the interest of time, I'll try and keep my remarks brief, but I do want to pick up and amplify on some of the points made by Chief Wilderman, and also just to offer a few comments that I hope provide a little bit of context to the event this evening. So we heard from the Chief at the outset of the evening that the region that you call home is for many British Columbians out of sight, out of mind, and I'm from that neck of the woods in the south of the province that for most people is the area that they call home, and they don't get outside of that region very often, so they don't see or have a real appreciation for the vastness of our province, for the incredible water resources that we have in this province, and for how those resources could be negatively impacted by large-scale industrial activities. So what the Chief Wilderman also mentioned was that As far as the Fort Nelson First Nation and many residents, I believe, in the Fort Nelson area believe, we don't at present have what people in the region believe is a credible process to assess the long-term impacts of major water withdrawals on lands and resources in the Northeast. And I think it's very clear from the presentation that Gilles gave a few minutes ago that there are significant questions that we need to grapple with now, in particular, in light of the fact that we are likely to see significant increases in industrial water withdrawals in the future. We heard, for example, from Jackie in her discussion about where she lives, that we have seen the entry of Progress Energy, now Petronas, into her region, and a fairly significant expansion in water withdrawal activities on that river that is so close to her heart and physically so close to her home. And to provide context here, I think we have to appreciate that we are in the earliest stages of water withdrawals in support of the shale gas industry in this province. If Petronas is successful in getting a pipeline built to the west coast of British Columbia, we will see very significant increases in fracking activities in support of gas production, and we will see, as a result, very significant increases in demands for water. So it's extremely important that we get things right well before we start to see these significant increases in demands for water resources in the Fort Nelson area and elsewhere to the south, in the South Peace region. And I think that that is why Chief Wildeman has very reasonably suggested at the outset of this evening's event that there are some simple things that we need to see in place to start to provide a greater sense of confidence that our shared water resources are being managed in a responsible fashion. So the Chief mentioned earlier the need for baseline studies to be completed before we start to see long-term water licenses granted. There are 20 applications currently before the provincial government in the Fort Nelson region alone. There could be many more applications in future years if shale gas developments accelerate. Why should we be concerned about this? Well, my experience in working with the First Nation, the Fort Nelson First Nation, over the last few years is that it was only as a result of questions being filed by the First Nation to the Oil and Gas Commission that we started to get an understanding of what potentially was at stake as far as water resources in Fort Nelson First Nation territory were concerned. It was, for example, only as a result of making an information request on all of the sources of water that were used in what was then a record-setting frack job by Apache that we learned that almost half of the water used in that massive frack job came from the ever-expanding network of burrow pits in your territory. At the time that the Fort Nelson First Nation inquired of the Oil and Gas Commission to try and get this information, we learned that there were, at that point, 2,000 approved burrow pits in the Horn River Basin alone. Some of these burrow pits are half a kilometer long and many meters wide and many meters deep. And as you start to put more and more of these pits in, and as you start to withdraw water from more and more surface and groundwater sources, it is without question that there will be cumulative impacts. So Chief Wildeman's suggestion at the start of the evening that we need baseline studies in place before these allocations take place is a very, very reasonable one. The second point that she made, which I'd like to amplify on, is this idea of requiring that any companies that are going to be extracting water and conducting fracking operations in your region should be required at a very minimum to be submitting 5-year comprehensive development plans that show exactly where they intend to be situating their gas wells, exactly where they intend to situate their water withdrawal points, exactly where they intend to locate all of the burrow pits that will be needed, exactly where they intend to put their roads, exactly how much forest they intend to clear. All of this information should be available to the Fort Nelson First Nation and to the general public well before companies are allowed to apply for the permits necessary to do the work. It's a very reasonable request, and it's one that if it was followed through on by the provincial government, would at least give people the opportunity to understand what the cumulative impacts are going to be, and hopefully to be able to influence decisions by industry and government about where activities take place, and more importantly, where they do not take place. Chief Wilderman also mentioned the need to think through capping water withdrawals. I would argue that you have to go even one step further than that. Sustainable, rational development of any natural resource requires that we place limits on annual production. And I would say that if we're going to be talking about the need to be more rigorous in the way that we set rates around water withdrawals, that we ought, at the same time ought to be capping how much fossil fuels the shale gas industry can extract in any one year, so that we have a greater level of control over those activities on the lands that are going to affect the hydrological cycle. Lastly, Chief Wilderman made the point that we need to see monitoring and enforcement activities carried out by an independent body. I think that that's a critically important suggestion. And again, I would just like to expand on that a little bit. I think that a very powerful argument can be made that the Oil and Gas Commission should not be in the position of monitoring and enforcing industry activities when it is also the agency that is responsible for granting the permits and approvals. I believe that that work is more justified and carried out by an independent body that ensures that the highest level of environmental protection is adhered to. And I would also amplify further on Chief Wilderman's suggestion by saying one thing in closing. I think that the time has come for one body provincially to be responsible for issuing all temporary water use permits and all longer-term water licenses, and that responsibility more properly rests with the Ministry of Environment and not with the Oil and Gas Commission. And I believe that if that change were to occur, water management in Fort Nelson Nation territory would be an order of magnitude better as far as the general public is concerned than what we have now. I think that there's an inherent tension and conflict between a regulator that is there to approve industry applications to develop gas resources and having a standalone body that is responsible for ensuring water allocations. I think the two need to be separated out. And with that, I would like to say that I'm to take any questions, and again, very much appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you very much, Ben. I would ask that we all get together and clap our hands for all of our presenters.